I'm Megan.
I'm CJ.
And I'm Erica.
And this is the Her Podcast.
Today we are sitting down with mother, advocate, radio producer, and host of the top downloaded podcast, The Shell Lake Massacre, Brittany Caffet. Brittany is an incredible woman, a well-known media personality in Saskatoon, a medical mama, and tireless advocate for Down syndrome. We talked to Brittany about why advocacy became so important to her after her son Henry was diagnosed with Down syndrome shortly after he was born. Henry was also born with a severe heart defect and ended up needing heart surgery when he was very little. So you guys, we get into this story and we hear what it's like navigating grief and walking through Brittany's journey.
Hello, testing, 1, 2, 3.
Look at that beautiful voice.
I love it. I know.
You have a great voice.
Thank you.
Yes, which I'm sure you already know.
Yes. Some people like it. I've learned that some people don't based on some
Recent
nice
events.
reviews. Yeah. But that's okay.
5 stars only, people. Thank you very much.
Literally. Otherwise, get out of here. What are you doing?
Why do they have an option for anything less than 5? It's like, come on.
Just don't listen then.
5 or bust.
Like
Five
no
or
one
bust.
forced you to, right?
Did you have a good day today?
I did. It was a busy day. I feel like it's always a busy day in the industry that I work in.
Yeah.
But it was good.
Yeah.
We had a work potluck today, which was fun.
Love a potluck.
What did you bring to the potluck?
I brought some cherry tarts.
Ooh.
I did not make the shells because
Why would
I'm
you?
only one woman.
Don't at me. I love
But I
cherry
made
tarts.
the filling. So good.
Do you do whipped cream on top?
No, I didn't. I'm not that fancy.
Well, I mean, you just a little. I'm not saying make the whipped cream. You buy that.
I should have. Next time I'll have to.
Okay, I love that you instantly said I didn't make the crust because I learned how to make pie this summer. And when I told people I made pie, like I learned how to make it, they were like, "Did you make the crust?" And I was like, "No."
So you filled
But
a
then-
pie shell.
Yeah,
But
it
I would
still
like
counts.
I would
Totally
like to
counts.
point out that someone said to me, I was like, "No, I just use the tender flake like pie crust." And then someone said to me, "You should make I have this great recipe and it's the tender flake recipe." And I was like, "Why wouldn't I just buy the crust then?"
Truly.
This feels like not being
Work smarter, not harder, right?
Plus it tastes delicious and whatever.
You don't need to reinvent the pie wheel.
Oh, pie crust is just there to get the filling to your mouth anyways.
Pie crust is
In
actually
my
my
opinion.
favorite part. But anyways.
Oh my
enough
gosh.
about pie
Anyway,
crust.
sorry.
I know. I like biscuits.
Listen, if I could just eat cherry pie filling out of the can and not feel bad about it, I would.
There you go.
I would. It's
Why not?
delicious. Okay, anyway, sorry. That's great that you had a potluck.
Yes.
Yeah, it
That's
was really
wonderful.
good. Good way to kind of end my work day and then come here and do this, which is great.
Yes, so good, so
Wonderful.
good.
Well, I think that we really wanted to sit down with you because you obviously are an advocate in your community and to anyone who follows you and hears about your story. But I think that we would love to take it back to the beginning and talk a little bit about your little Bubba Henry.
Yeah.
Yes, and learn more about him and his journey and your journey and what that looked like being a medical mom and finding out his diagnosis, and we can sort of go off from there.
Yeah, for sure. So Henry was born September 2nd, 2019. To take you back even further, my daughter Elizabeth was born in 2017. I had a pretty routine pregnancy with her. Went through the ringer with all the newborn stuff like every first-time mom does. And then when we found out we were expecting our second baby, we were really excited. And my pregnancy, honestly, it went really well. We did, all the ultrasounds and everything looked fantastic. He looked like a healthy little guy. I actually ended up having some extra ultrasounds done just because I had a low-lying placenta. And there's actually a history of heart conditions in males in my family. My dad has a heart defect. My cousin Ryan was born with a heart defect. So when I was with the specialist, I asked her, can you just take an extra close look at his heart? And she did. And she said, everything looks great. But just so you know, there are a few things that sometimes we can't see on an ultrasound, which I feel like looking back now, that was really foreshadowing what was going to come. So I went into kind of false labor with Henry at about 35 weeks. So it was a solid month, more than a month, because he was born like 40 weeks one day, where I was having contractions like all the time.
What?
It was awful. My OB, Dr. Matt Schubert, was fantastic and took such good care of me and made sure we were really monitoring Henry, and making sure that both he and I were safe. But I had contractions that weren't really doing anything for over a month before he was born.
Constantly.
Yeah, well, it would be like not... maybe I'm a little over dramatic there.
No,
Not constantly,
month?
but
That's-
a month of like fairly regular contractions. I went into the hospital quite a few times. We did lots of non-stress tests, but everything looked fine. We did follow-up ultrasounds to make sure he was still okay and happy in there, and he was. So finally, when I was 40 weeks and one day, I was having really bad contractions again. I started having a bit of spotting. So we went in, and Dr. Schubert was at the hospital that day again. And he really advocated for me that day and said, like, you know, this is enough of this. Like, we need to do something to help her out. So I was induced at 40 weeks and one day. And Henry was born about 14 hours later. He was a big baby. He was 9 pounds, 1.5 ounces.
Oh my goodness.
And the second he was born, for me, the energy in the room really shifted.
Okay.
Can you explain what that would feel like? Like the energy in the room shifted. What did that look like for you? Like, what did that sound like? What did that just feel like for you?
Yeah. So there was, you know, when you're having a baby, everything kind of like moves in hyperspeed and slow motion at the same time.
That is a really good way to put it.
It's like this surreal experience, but you're full of like anticipation and hope, and it's so painful, but you know that something great is about to happen. And as Henry was born and then placed on my chest, I remember looking at him, and then time just basically stopped. Everything froze because I looked at him, and my mind couldn't even really put it together. But I remember just wanting everyone to get out of the room so I could be alone and have my phone to look up the symptoms of Down syndrome. The second he was placed on my chest, I knew.
Like looking at him?
Yeah. And, you know, looking back now, like some people will say like severe or not severe Down syndrome features. Henry's features were pretty subtle, but I knew right away. My husband says he knew right away, but the doctors and nurses did not.
Okay.
None of the doctors and nurses noticed that Henry had Down syndrome. And I ended up having a lot of issues. Like, I hemorrhaged, I lost a lot of blood, which also contributed to kind of like the almost delirious state I was in. Like, nothing felt like it was real. So a little while passed and everything had kind of settled with me. My husband stayed with me that night, of course, and we both were a little out of it. So nurses kept coming in and out of the room, and they would hold Henry and take care of him for us, essentially, because we were both exhausted and I had lost a lot of blood. So I really wasn't in a position to be like up and down trying to care for him. And I just remember like wanting to ask them as they came in, like, don't you see this? But none of them were commenting on it or asking if we had noticed any of these features. And I still wasn't really in any shape then to be like trying to look up symptoms. I was still in the delivery room. This was at the old hospital, not our fancy new hospital. So the rooms were pretty rough.
So I mean, that wallpaper though, right?
Oh, I know.
Fabulous.
But eventually we did get transferred from the delivery floor up into the maternity ward. And again, a little bit of time passed, and we asked a family doctor who came in to look at him. And we said, like, you know, we've noticed these symptoms. He has one line on his palm, which is actually, it's one of the really common symptoms of Down syndrome. Most people have multiple lines.
Like all these lines here.
All these lines. Henry has on each hand, he has just one going across.
Because I was going to ask if you can explain what you saw.
Yeah.
You were like, something's up.
So the biggest thing for me was he had this little tuft at the back of his neck, like a little extra puff of skin and fluid, essentially.
Okay.
It looked bigger, I guess, at the time than it does now because he had just been born. Like there's a lot of extra fluid
swollen
and stuff.
too, yeah.
So that was one thing I noticed right away. And then his eyes. He has like these beautiful almond shaped eyes. And right away when I looked at them, I knew. So we noticed his eyes, this little extra tuft of skin. We noticed his palms, of course. His ears are pretty small and dainty, but mine are too.
Were you already familiar with Down syndrome at that point, so you knew to look for these markers? Or was this like an innate, like just from generic understanding of what someone with Down syndrome might look like?
Yeah, I have a more distant cousin who was born with Down syndrome.
Okay.
Her name's Megan. She's in her 20s.
What a great name.
Hey, Megan.
Yeah.
Hi, Megan.
She's fantastic. So
Okay.
that being said, though, I think growing up around someone who has Down syndrome and then suddenly having a baby who has Down syndrome, it's hard to think rationally in those moments. Like I knew someone with Down syndrome who has a wonderful life, and that still didn't stop me from feeling really scared.
Yeah. So sorry, the doctor, you asked the family doctor to look at.
So we asked the family doctor to look at him, and she told us that she didn't think that he had Down syndrome. He didn't look like it. His features weren't like severe enough for her to consider that. She told us that she would like refer us to a pediatrician, and if we were still concerned, we could take it up with him. And then later on that day, we asked a nurse as well if she thought maybe he looked like he had Down syndrome. And she said basically the same thing as the doctor had. Like, no, we don't think so. He doesn't look like it. He doesn't look like other babies with Down syndrome that we've seen. So at that point, I think I basically just felt like the worst mother on the planet to be thinking, because at that time, honestly, I think a lot of us do, before you're educated on it, you think of Down syndrome or other disabilities kind of in a negative light.
Yeah.
So I thought, like, what a horrible mom am I? Like, I think that my baby looks like he has Down syndrome. And these other these medical professionals are telling me, like, no, he doesn't. So I just thought, like, what is the matter with me? My husband was having all of the same thoughts, though. So we didn't really openly discuss it with anyone else who came in the room, like our family members and stuff. But when we were alone, we would kind of talk like, have you noticed these things? And both of us were very much on the same page. Like we thought something was up, but nobody else really seemed to see what we were seeing. And we were getting ready to be discharged the day after he was born. And Tyler noticed, Tyler's my husband, by the way.
There we go.
Tyler noticed that Henry was kind of breathing strangely. He was breathing into his belly. His belly would get really big with every breath he would take, which isn't typically what you see. So he asked a nurse to come in and take a look, and she took a listen and she said, you know what, I think he's okay. But if it keeps happening, just let us know and we'll keep an eye on him. And a little bit of time went by and he was still breathing like that. And they were still like getting the discharge papers ready to send us home. And I'm honestly, I'm not sure if I would have at that point been brave enough to stand up and say something, but Tyler really took charge in that moment, and I'm so proud of him because he's like a really quiet, passive person typically. But he went out to the nurse's station and he said, like, look, something is wrong and like we need help. You can't send us home like this. So they ended up coming back in, taking a listen again and then saying like, no, there's something going on. So they paged the NICU team to come up right away. And they had no warmers upstairs. They wanted him in a warmer. They didn't really have them in the maternity ward. They had one really old one in like a side room off the maternity ward. So they brought us over there so Henry could be in a warmer for the NICU staff to look at him. So we're standing in this like dilapidated room at the Royal University Hospital with like all of this random old medical equipment around us. Our baby is in this warmer surrounded by all of these staff. And the NICU sent up like respiratory therapists. They sent a couple of nurses and they sent one resident who came up to do the initial assessment. And I will never forget her. Her name is Natasha. I've had the chance to speak to her since this all happened. But she like looked over Henry and I asked her like, do you think he has Down syndrome? And she said to me, she said, you know what? I can't tell you if he has Down syndrome. I'm not sure yet. But what I can tell you is that he is going to run and he's going to play and he's going to have a fantastic life. He is. So just let us take care of him and it'll be okay. So at that point, I think I basically knew at that point, like she had confirmed that, yeah, he did have Down syndrome. But when I think about what a beautiful confirmation that is, for someone to say like, okay, maybe he does, but like, let's think of all of the things that he's still going to do.
Well, and instead of, I think what would be a normal, I feel like probably I've never had an experience like this, but I can only imagine that typically it's like, you know, we're really sorry to inform you. You know, we have to tell you some news. And instead, even for and I know you'd already been dealing with it before having that confirmation, but the confirmation being in such a positive light.
Yeah, that's really
like what a I don't want to speak for you, but what a beautiful way to start even that journey of knowing like we already have someone who's already painted a picture of like hope. And not what we think. And I think we can all admit, like what you said, if you think about disabilities with your children, you're like, you only think of the negative things immediately, right? So that's really beautiful.
Yeah. And I've since spoken to so many families who've had really bad diagnosis experiences. So this for us, it did seem a little apocalyptic being in this like old wing of the hospital. But to have someone who like really truly believed that he may have Down syndrome, but he's still going to have a really good life, be the person to kind of deliver that initial news to us was everything. I think it really set the tone for how we were able to move forward with this new diagnosis falling in our laps. And I am so appreciative to her for how she handled that. And I've talked about it before and I'll talk about it forever because I really hope that every medical professional who hears that story can understand what a deep impact your words can have on a family who is trying to wrap their heads around a diagnosis
while just having a baby.
Like,
like
let's
let alone
remember that too.
Getting a diagnosis, let alone like, again, hormones. Your body is doing wild things after having babies. Like that is so much happening when we're just going to say confirmed, right? Confirmed that for you. Do you remember like what you felt or like how your husband responded?
I think both of us were just very much in shock. Right after we had that discussion with Natasha, they wheeled Henry down to the NICU. And I will never forget walking into the NICU at the old hospital because right now they have these nice separate rooms. You're able to stay with your baby overnight. And I'm so glad that they have that now because that was not our experience. We walked into a room that was like 3 or 4 bays full of isolates with babies in each one. There were babies crying, families talking, doctors and nurses talking to families, the incessant beeping of all of these monitors on all of these babies. It was so loud and so overwhelming that like, I'll never forget it. It was one of the most horrible experiences of my entire life to have these doors thrust open. Your baby is stuck in a little case, essentially. And isolette has a cover on it, so you can't pick them up. He had all of these tubes and wires all over him. It was horrible. It was really horrible. So I have a lot of empathy for any family who's gone through a NICU experience. And people end up in the NICU for so many different reasons. I don't think I realized until we had Henry how common it is for people to end up having their babies in the NICU what a traumatic experience that is. It was like, it felt those couple of days, it was just trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. And that continued for the next few days as we kind of learned a little bit more about his diagnosis.
So how long then were you guys in the NICU?
Henry was only in the NICU for a total of 9 days, which is like, I realize how privileged we are for him to have had that short of a NICU stay.
If you are in the market to buy or sell a home, or maybe both, and want a smooth and stress-free process, then we have the realtor for you. Lacey Caffet is an award-winning Saskatoon realtor who prides herself in being your one-stop shop for both buying and selling homes, and her passion shines through when you meet her, you guys. With over 12 years in the real estate industry and a 98% list-to-sale ratio, Lacey finds the best individual approach and plan for her clients, which includes an extensive and personalized marketing strategy because she understands just how important that is. She also has an exclusive offer for the Her community. Mention the code LACY5 to save $500 off one real estate transaction. Along with her husband and partner, Kyle Berneski, Lacey is licensed in residential, commercial, and farm, so she literally has you covered no matter what real estate area you need. And she has built a solid and long-lasting relationships within the industry, so she can dial up the best professionals in the business for you too. Can't you just feel that stress melting away right now? So if you want a driven, hardworking, and connected agent who will go above and beyond for you, get in touch with Lacey. You will find her at Realty Executive Saskatoon, on socials at Lacey Caffet, that's LACEYCOSSETTE, and online at lacycaffet.com. And remember to mention the code LACY5 to save $500 off one real estate transaction. Don't worry, friends, we have all her info linked in the show notes for you.
But it was like a very action-filled few days. The day after Henry was admitted to the NICU.
Which, can I ask why he was admitted to the NICU?
Yeah, so
which maybe we're getting to.
Yeah, babies who are born with Down syndrome often have kind of a myriad of other health concerns that it's really important that they check for. 50% of babies who are born with Down syndrome also have a heart defect. And there are just a lot of other medical things that can come along with Down syndrome. So they really wanted to check him out and make sure everything was okay, which it turned out it was not.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what did that look like then? Because obviously you go in and then they start, I'm assuming, running tests and like watching him.
Yeah. So as soon as we went down into the NICU, they had all of these different monitors hooked up to him. And one of the pediatricians came over just with an ultrasound machine because the first thing they wanted to do was check his heart because it's so common. And Dr. Despal was the doctor in the NICU who was helping us, and he told us right away. We kind of, again, went off into a side room, and he told us he was 99% sure that Henry had Down syndrome. He would just wait for the blood test to give us 100%, but he was fairly certain. And then he also let us know that he would have to bring cardiology in because he noticed some defects in Henry's heart just with an ultrasound, but he wasn't able to really confirm for us what that was until cardiology came to take a look. So the next day is when cardiology came.
And that's, I think, an important thing to touch on is that, you know, this took days. You got the news that there's some things I'm seeing about his heart, and then you had to wait until the next day.
Yeah.
For them to explore that.
Yeah, it's not instant.
Yeah, it's not instant. So the next day is when cardiology came, and they did Henry's very first echocardiogram, which is basically, it's a really detailed ultrasound of the heart. They can see things that you can't see with just a standard ultrasound machine. So we were not at the hospital, actually, because we had a 2-year-old also at the time. So we had gone home to have supper with Elizabeth, and we got a call from one of the nurses in the NICU saying, cardiology is here right now and she needs you to come back right now. So we got in the car and we drove back into the city, and we had bad luck at this hospital, I tell you, but all of the quiet rooms for the NICU were busy. So they took us off into this isolated old wing of the hospital. They had to bring in some extra chairs from other spots. The ugliest green walls I've ever seen. So it was Tyler, myself, the cardiologist, and one nurse. They sent a nurse with us. And we sat down, and the cardiologist told us, okay, I'm going to draw a picture of what a normal heart looks like. So she sketched out this pretty rough sketch of a heart on this piece of paper. And then she said, okay, now I'm going to walk you through what's going on with Henry's heart. And she started drawing, and it felt like she was drawing for like an hour. I'm sure it was faster than that, but she drew 3 holes in the heart. There was one right in the center that she described to us as a massive hole in the center of his heart. He also, the structure of his valves going into his heart was different than you typically see. Normally there are 2. Henry only had 1. Okay. And she told us there are a lot of other issues, but I'm not even going to get into them because these are the main ones that we have to worry about right now.
And your baby is how old?
3 days.
3 days?
Yeah,
Wow.
3 days old. So after that, we went back into the NICU. She had let us know that he would require open heart surgery within the first 6 months of his life. And then we went back into the NICU, and we just sat and held him. And our nurse that was working that night, she asked if she could have my phone, and she took a picture of us holding him. Yeah. And she said, like, I know you don't want this right now, but you're gonna want it. And I really appreciate that. Like, I'll send you guys the pictures.
Yeah,
So you can share this one. But like the amount of love in that one photo, like, it's not like the aesthetic photos that you see of parents with their newborn. But like, this is our story, right? So I'm so grateful that she had the foresight to do that. And I think there's a lot of people that work in the NICU who do kind of understand how, like, it might feel really ugly in the moment, but it's still your baby's story. So you might not want to look at the pictures for a really long time. It took me a really long time to feel comfortable to kind of look back and relive that trauma, but I'm so glad now that I'm able to do that.
So when did he have surgery?
He had surgery February 28th of 2020. So he was just shy of 6 months old when he had his open heart surgery.
Well, and how did that feel waiting?
Oh gosh.
Knowing that your child is going to have, because I'm assuming, did you say he came home after 9 days?
Yeah, he did.
Okay. So like, what did that look like between 9 days and 6 months for you guys?
A lot of doctor's visits.
Okay.
Yeah.
We were at the hospital very frequently, and not just because of his heart. There are like some other complications that can come with Down syndrome that they were wanting to check for. So we had lots of like ENT visits. We'd go to the pediatrician regularly. He had tons of blood work. And because his heart wasn't functioning properly, he was also just so much more prone to getting sick. Yeah. He had pneumonia at one point, bladder infections as like a tiny, tiny baby. Thankfully, everything we were able to catch quite early because Henry's pediatrician is so wonderful. And she's always prompted me right from the beginning that like, if you feel like something is off, do not hesitate to bring him in. Like the emergency room is made for kids like Henry who need it. So it's there for you.
I'm really curious on during this time, can you speak to like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you already said the words that you were feeling guilty, like for thinking he had Down syndrome. And then you get these confirmations. What were you experiencing at that time? Like, what were the emotions you were going through?
It was honestly, I'm not sure I allowed myself to really feel a lot. I would honestly say like the first entire year of Henry's life was really just a whirlwind for me. When I was pregnant with Henry, I was actually like hosting a morning show. I was on the C95 morning show when I was pregnant with him. We announced my pregnancy. I moved over to the Rock 102 morning show. Before I went on maternity leave, I was on the CKOM morning show again. And then I had my baby. And then I suddenly had to tell everyone that this baby they had been hearing about had been born with Down syndrome, which was honestly like quite overwhelming. I still remember when I shared like on social media that he had Down syndrome, and we were in the NICU waiting room at the time. And I hit like publish on the post on my phone, and I just put my phone away in my bag, and we went into the NICU and held him and loved on him. And when I came back out, like my phone was just flooded with all of this support, which was a really wonderful thing, but also incredibly overwhelming. Once Henry came home when he was about 2 weeks old, I actually brought him into the radio station and went on all 3 morning shows with Henry just to, you know, announce that we'd had the baby and that Henry had been born with Down syndrome, because we wanted to be really open and transparent about that fact. I didn't want to make it seem to anybody like I was trying to hide the fact that he had been born with a disability. I didn't want to give anyone the opportunity to assume that we were ashamed of him for any reason. So we were really like loud and open about the fact that he had been born with a disability, and we loved him and we didn't want to change him. But suddenly having so many eyes on you going through such a vulnerable thing was incredibly overwhelming. Like so many people in Saskatoon knew that I had a baby with Down syndrome, and it felt like people were almost looking at me as to how you should maybe react if you have a baby with Down syndrome, or if your friend has a baby with Down syndrome. So I felt a lot of pressure to be like really positive and upbeat and like educate people. So as I was learning about Down syndrome, I felt this responsibility to help like thousands of other people learn about it too.
So almost like pushed into advocacy a little bit.
And like it's
And a weight, I imagine, like a heaviness.
Yeah, a huge weight. And like in a way, I'm glad it played out the way it did, because I know Henry has so many people on his side who like maybe wouldn't have even heard about him, or like people feel like they know someone with Down syndrome because they see Henry through their phone, right? Which I think is a fantastic thing. I still, to this day, if there is a new baby in Saskatoon that has Down syndrome, I usually find out about it pretty quickly, because people will message me and like ask for advice and stuff, which is wonderful, but it's also a very big responsibility to have. There have been, you know, some other people in the Down syndrome community who have kind of accused me of like making it seem like it's all just great and easy to have a baby with Down syndrome. But I think everybody filters their social media.
Well, and
you know,
You get to choose what you put out there.
This is what we talk about. We said this to someone at one point, and we're like, when, like, yes, you know, we hold space, all of us with our platforms, a bit of a I'm not using this word, but like an influencing space. When you have followers, when you have a business, you hold the space. But I'm like, it's still my space though. And I get to post what I want, when I want, and I get to filter it the way I want because it's mine. And just like I get to choose the clothes that you will see today, I get to choose the post and the words behind it. And somewhere along the way, people are like, no, but I want to see, I don't like what you're wearing. I want to see something different.
Yeah.
And I'm like, get.
Like, I feel like if the worst thing people have to say about me is that I make it seem like having a kid with Down syndrome is great, I feel like I'm doing
You're
okay.
too positive.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
Like-
not a bad thing.
No. And, you know, there are like difficult aspects to it, but really, Henry's a fantastic kid. And, you know, the hard stuff that we've gone through has been 110% worth it because at the end of the day, we get to have him in our family. Like it's totally worth it. So, you know, the medical stuff has been a lot. Things are settling down now, but worth it. I would do it 100 times over again to end up exactly where we are right now.
Well, and I want to ask like some of the challenges and these types of things, but I'm curious if you want to if we want to talk about challenges or jump to where we were in your story about him having heart surgery and hear about that first.
Let's carry on with the story.
Yeah.
So February of 2020, Henry had open heart surgery. So we had actually got the call about 2 weeks before. So we went into like a little mini quarantine at
I was
home.
just gonna say,
In
wait a
January
second.
of 2020,
Yes.
we went into, or I guess it would have been beginning of February 2020, we went into a little mini quarantine at home because if he got sick before his surgery, we'd have to push it back. So we went to Edmonton and we stayed at Ronald McDonald House, which is a life-changing charity. If you ever have the opportunity to support Ronald McDonald House charities, I highly recommend it because they made our stay there so much easier than it would have been. But so we went to Ronald McDonald House, and Henry had heart surgery on the 28th of February. We had a fantastic surgeon. His name is Dr. Yonker. Going in, we weren't sure if Henry would have one open heart surgery or multiple to fix all of the issues with his heart. And Dr. Yonker came out after the surgery and let us know that he had been able to repair Henry's heart completely. So he wouldn't require further surgeries.
What did that feel like?
Such relief.
Such a sense of relief. You know, the lead up to the surgery was really stressful, just not knowing what to expect. No parent knows what to expect. Whether, and it like for every surgery as well, whether your kid has one surgery or 10, I think you feel that same pit in your stomach the entire time, regardless, because you just don't know what's going to happen. So, you know, his surgery was multiple hours. I don't even know how long it was because we sat in the waiting room at the Stollery. They have like this giant fish tank, and I just remember sitting and staring at that fish tank for hours. And finally, when they brought Henry out and we got to see him again, that was another like very overwhelming moment for us. We had some family friends who have had babies have heart surgery who kind of like tried to prepare us for, you know, what you'll see. And there's a lot of tubes and a lot of cords. But until it is your baby on that table, I don't think it's possible to really grasp what that's going to feel like.
No amount of preparation, I imagine, is enough.
No, not at all. It was an incredibly overwhelming experience to see him and he was tiny. He wasn't even 6 months old yet. And he was, tubes coming out of everywhere, like so many IVs because the amount of medication that they had to pump into him was just insane. The amount of machines beside his bedside, the loud beeping every time like an IV would need to be adjusted, the machines would beep like crazy. It was so overwhelming. And I just really hope, I wish in an ideal world no other family would have to experience that, because it was again, trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma.
So the open heart surgery, what were they going in to do?
So they repaired the holes in Henry's heart, and then they took his one intake valve and they made it into 2 separate valves.
Incredible.
And keep in mind, your heart is about the size of your fist. So for a newborn baby, like walnut sized. Honestly,
Impressive.
it feels like magic.
Yeah.
Really. The fact that they're able to do that now. I often think about, had Henry been born like 50 years ago, between him having Down syndrome and his heart defect, how differently things would have turned out for him. So I'm very glad that he's born right now.
Yeah.
So you said things have calmed down. Can you elaborate on that? Does it look like yearly visits with the pediatrician? Is it like, what kind of therapies? Again, I'm not versed in it. Like, would he be going through right now?
Yeah. So right now we're seeing cardiology just once a year. With his pediatrician, we're like, as needed. For sure, yearly checkups. There's always just random illnesses and stuff that come up. 3 kids, they're going to get sick.
Yeah.
But other than that, and like regular visits to ENT and stuff like that, he's good medically. With therapies, he does go to therapies regularly. He goes to the AIM program, which is a provincial program in Saskatchewan that provides support for children and young adults with Down syndrome. So from birth until 22 years old, as well as their families. So he's able to access speech therapy, occupational therapy, literacy once he's old enough. It's a really amazing program. And I'm the board chair of the AIM program now. So yeah, that's a program that's very, very close to our heart because it has helped him so much.
That's
Incredible.
amazing. I really want to just touch on, how you navigated, or when you stopped and allowed yourself to navigate and feel the trauma after the trauma after the trauma, and how you moved through and kind of were able to focus on you a little bit and heal.
Yeah, so it's really been like an ongoing process.
Yeah.
My husband and I actually, right before Henry's open heart surgery, we decided to go to couples therapy together, just to get some kind of strategies for us to use. There wasn't really anything like wrong that we needed to go to therapy for, but with such a traumatic thing on the horizon, we were like, look, we need to go and sit down with a professional and make sure that we're going to be okay through this. So I think like proactive therapy leading up to something so traumatic was like a really good thing for us to do. After that, there was a lot of therapy involved for me when we decided to try for another baby.
Yes.
So I guess it would have been 2020 we started, or 2021. Yeah.
How old is she now?
She'll be 2 in November.
Okay. And I'm
so
like,
2021.
what year is it?
Math? What's this girl math?
So beginning of 2021, we decided we wanted to start trying for another baby. But that had a lot of anxiety tied to that for me. Just because of how traumatic everything with Henry had been. Not only, finding out about all of this stuff after his birth, but the delivery was very traumatic for me. So there was a lot of counseling involved to help me kind of work my way through that, which I'm really glad I did, because my pregnancy and her delivery ended up being like a really healing process for me. I felt really like respected and cared for throughout the entire thing. A lot of the medical professionals that I dealt with understood our past experiences. I had my same OB, Dr. Matt Schubert, was there. He had delivered Henry, and he was there for me again when Charlotte was born. And yeah, I felt so safe and cared for, and he really went out of his way to do everything he could to make me feel safe. Dr. Schubert actually passed away recently, which was a huge loss for the obstetrics community in Saskatoon.
If you're in the market for new glasses or sunglasses, then you need to check out Canadian brand Kits Eye Care. Kits has become my favorite place to shop for sunglasses because they offer an amazing selection of so many great styles, and they are unbelievably affordable. They also have a huge selection of prescription eyeglasses, and you can do a virtual try-on while you are shopping online to really see how the styles will look on you. Kits is a Canadian-owned company, which you know we love, and they take pride in offering a wide selection, speedy service, and superior craftsmanship. We have a super special offer for our Her community. This offer is unreal, friends. Head to kits.ca, that's KITS.ca, right now to choose your favorite pair of Kits brand prescription glasses or sunglasses priced at or up to $99, and you're going to get them for free when you use the code WELCOME. Did you hear that? For free. You can follow along and connect with Kits on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and LinkedIn at Kits Eye Care. I love to follow along on Instagram to see the latest styles on Kits customers. And you can shop the entire Kits eyewear collection along with their curated selection of designer brands at kits.ca. Remember to use the code WELCOME to get your first pair of Kits up to $99 free, and then send us a DM and tell us which style you snagged. Happy shopping, friends.
But I'm just so grateful that he was there for me when I really needed someone to, walk me through that. And he did beautifully.
What was that like when they put Charlotte on your chest and you looked at her?
It was a big sigh of relief. Also, there was a little bit of guilt tied into it because that hadn't been the experience that I had with Henry. With Henry, I feel like it was a lot of like fear instantly. And I still to this day feel guilty about the way that I reacted. Like externally, I was fine. None of the doctors and nurses noticed like anything was going on in my head. But internally, like the panic and fear that I felt, I do feel a lot of guilt for that. And I wish that I could go back and change it, but clearly I can't.
And I'm curious because I feel like possibly others who are going through a similar diagnosis or something else, like what was the fear narrative that was playing in your mind?
I think just a lot of the really common misconceptions that people have about Down syndrome, that they are never going to be independent, that life would basically be really sad and hard. And like Henry's only 4 and I've already like come to realize what a load of crap that is. It's not true. Like our life is not sad at all. Nobody has to feel sorry for us. Having a baby with Down syndrome really shifted my perspective on honestly almost everything, almost every aspect of my life I look at in a completely different way. I parent differently. I conduct my work differently.
Can you explain what that looks like?
Yeah. So before Henry was born, I think I had like almost these standards that I felt like we needed to live up to, in terms of like how we presented ourselves, the type of things that we did, the type of work that I hoped my kids would grow up to do. And I think a lot of us have those almost like ableist mindsets of, well, my kid's going to have like this caliber of job. They're not going to work at XYZ. I'm not even going to name a place because it makes no sense. But I did have a lot of those classist, ableist visions in my head of what like a successful, happy family should look like. So having Henry really caused me to look at those beliefs that I had held and really evaluate them and realize how little sense any of them made. Like it doesn't matter where you earn your paycheck. It doesn't matter what size of house you go home to at the end of the day. It doesn't matter if you have like the fanciest things or just really basic stuff. Like at the end of the day, none of it matters. Like having Henry and almost losing Henry really helped kind of shift our perspective.
I I think that when something big happens or something traumatic happens or impactful personally happens, it very quickly shifts your view of what's important and what isn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I've also realized definitely that I had kind of these preconceived notions of, you know, Elizabeth's healthy, she's fine, it's great. I've also realized that like that can change at any moment.
Yes.
So many people have these mindsets that like, oh, you know, like it's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to my family. It can. And even if your child isn't born with a disability or you weren't born with a disability, doesn't mean that you may not end up with one someday. So I think that there's really something to be said for all of us to be pushing for more inclusion. Literally everywhere we go, there should be more inclusion, because you never know when you or your child or a loved one might be the one who needs it.
I'm curious on what inclusion looks like for Henry. Like when you say that, like, and you think about your Henry, like what do you picture or where do you see the lack of for him?
Yeah. So we have been very fortunate when it comes to inclusion for Henry, but I am also speaking from a place of extreme privilege.
Yes.
When I say that.
Yes.
You know, we are a middle class Caucasian family. So inclusion comes a lot easier for Henry than it may come for some other children or adults. For Henry, I think the biggest thing for me is to see him included at school is a big thing. Yeah. He just started pre-K and it's been like a really wonderful experience. And I think for me, him being included at school with his peers is a big thing, because those are the kids who are going to grow up alongside him. So inclusion early at school will hopefully lead to inclusion in a workplace someday, and him being able to get a job wherever he wants to get a job. I also see inclusion being him being able to look on TV or, you know, at a billboard and see someone who looks like him, who has Down syndrome, or, you know, and that goes for any disability. For kids who have a disability to be able to look at any given type of media and see someone who looks like them, and it's not even just with disabilities, people of different races. It all adds up. You need to be able to see people who look like you wherever you look, or you feel like there's not a place for you. And I never want Henry to feel like there's not a place for him.
I'm thinking about right now how, like, as a mom, you know, all we want for our kids is for them to be happy, for them to feel safe and feel included. And like, speaking as a mother of a privileged white male child, that does come easier too. I'm curious if you can speak about any like how you navigate those like internal mama instincts and like worries and fears whilst having the added you know, fears of inclusion and ableism.
Yeah, there have been times where we've been out, and I honestly, looking back, I don't know if these things have actually happened or if I'm just overanalyzing things, but
Yeah.
you know, sometimes we'll be out in a place and someone will kind of see Henry and then take their kids and move over to another area. I don't know if they're moving because he has Down syndrome and they don't want to be by him, or if they're just ready to move on to the next activity, you know? But sometimes I think I'm quick to jump on they must be trying to exclude him. And I think for me, it's really just evaluating if they meant it that way. And then just carrying on as if they hadn't, because I think the best way to model inclusion for my kids and for everyone else there is to just be with people that will include us. You know, if one family moves away, there's other families who have kids that are willing to play with Henry. My girls are always willing to play with Henry. And, you know, I think having Henry has really helped me on my journey of inclusion, because, you know, I used to look at someone with a disability, and I'd almost feel like this pity, like this little pit in my stomach that I would just like feel sorry for them.
Well, like less than a little bit.
Yeah.
And I get that.
A lot of us, I think we don't even realize that we're
Yep.
doing it, but you kind of look out of the corner of your eye and you're like, now that I have Henry, I don't feel that way about literally anybody. Like, I'm able to look at someone with Down syndrome and really see them as a person, not as a person with Down syndrome, just a person, which I think is one of the most phenomenal gifts that Henry has given us, is we're able to see past so many labels and just see people as they are. And I think that's really the heart of inclusion, is not looking at a child in a wheelchair. No, they're a child who wants to play at the playground.
Yeah.
Build one that they can play at. That's really the heart of it, is just seeing the people, not the people and whatever's different about them.
If there's people that are listening that are, going through their own diagnosis or, have walked a similar journey to you, what would you tell them? What would you want them to know? Like, what would be an encouragement that you could give that you would have wanted to receive?
Honestly, I feel like this is next to an impossible question to answer. I don't think, when we were really in the throes of things with Henry, I don't think there's anything that anybody could have said that would have honestly made me feel better. Lots of people like threw out these encouraging comments, and like, you take it for what it is. It's people, they don't know what to say. They're trying to be kind.
I'm sure there could have been a lot of toxic positivity.
Yeah. Yeah,
Right?
I'd agree with that.
Like well-intentioned, but
Yeah.
Right?
So my very favorite thing that people did was just like sit with it. Like my best friend Amber, we've been best friends like since I was born, essentially. But I texted her and told her like, hey, like, I just wanted to let you know, like, Henry has Down syndrome, whatever. And she didn't say, like, first of all, she didn't say she's sorry, which never, ever tell someone you're sorry if they have a baby with Down syndrome, because there's nothing to be sorry for. Just congratulate them. But all Amber told me was that he is beautiful and she can't wait to visit him. And that was it. Like, there wasn't like, you're going to be okay. It's going to be fine. What do you need me to do? What can I fix? There's nothing you can fix in that moment. There just isn't. And it's a really shitty reality to accept that, like, as a friend or a family member, there is not really anything that you can say that's going to make it feel better, because it hurts like deeply. I'm not sure I've ever experienced like that deep of a mourning period in a way, like
Grief.
yeah, I was grieving the son that I thought I was gonna have, and suddenly everything was different. Like the whole path that I thought was laid out for us suddenly wasn't there. And nobody could have said, and nobody said anything to make me feel better, because there's nothing you can say. So yeah, the most helpful thing really was just people telling me like, congratulations, and coming and visiting him and just holding him like a regular baby, because he was a regular baby. You don't have to do anything different. Just be there and show up, and maybe bring a freezer meal while you're at it, just like you would for any other new mom.
And a coffee.
Yeah.
Yeah. The lack of support for moms postpartum in general, but then just thinking about like, what would you do for any other mom, right? Because you are any other mom. It's like, it doesn't have to be this whole thing. And another thing that just struck me was when you said what Amber's response was, I thought of the doctor.
Yeah.
And I think that, more of that kind of support and response, and less apologizing and I'm sorry and it's a negative thing, because it isn't.
Yeah, we were really fortunate with our family and our close friends and colleagues. Everyone was so supportive and they really were there for us. But I know families that haven't gotten that kind of support, which is really heartbreaking. So if you have a friend who's having a baby, whether they have a diagnosis or not, like there needs to be so much more support for women postpartum. And when you have a diagnosis on top of everything else, or you're running back and forth between the NICU and home, it feels like impossible to heal in that postpartum period, to heal both physically and mentally. There's a lot going on. So yeah, in general, more support for women postpartum.
100%.
Highly recommend.
I want to ask one final question before we get to our final question. And that is just to briefly touch on how you navigate the community within advocating for Down syndrome. Because I know you just quickly touched on, you were kind of like not accused, or like people have shared that like, oh, you make everything sound so peachy keen. How do you navigate still standing in your advocacy and being so public facing with maybe what other people are feeling about it?
I think the older Henry gets, the more I realize that just because someone else has a baby with Down syndrome doesn't mean that we're going to agree on everything.
Yeah.
Our kids have extra chromosomes, and sometimes that is literally the only thing we have in common, and that's okay. There are great things that come out of having people who you can relate to and who understand kind of the trials and tribulations that you're facing raising a child with Down syndrome. But we don't have to agree on everything. Just like your friends who have typical children, you may not agree on every single parenting choice you make. Yeah. And it's going to be the same thing parenting a child with Down syndrome. So I think that in general, just be accepting, your friend or whatever, they're going to be doing what feels right for them in the moment. And if something feels right, who are you to tell them it's wrong?
Yeah.
I think everyone has different styles of advocacy. And at the end of the day, if you can lay your head down on the pillow and feel like you did the best thing for your child that day, whether it's being like a really loud vocal advocate, or whether it's setting up meetings with the school board, or, making another appointment with the pediatrician because you don't feel like this issue has been addressed. There are so many different forms of advocacy. And even with typical kids, we advocate for typical kids, making appointments, standing up for them if something happens at school that you don't feel okay with. We all just have to be a little bit more accepting of, we're going to parent differently. We're going to believe different things. And that's okay. As long as your child is cared for and safe and loved at the end of the day, that's literally the only thing that matters.
100%. Yeah. I'm going to ask you the question we always ask at the end.
Sure.
What is, if you could share a piece of advice that you love to give people, or like the best piece of advice that you've been given?
My favorite piece of advice is very simple, and it is just to be kind. I know that's so like simple and everybody has it on a t-shirt. But honestly, like when we were at the hospital and Henry was in the NICU, we were in line to pay for parking. And there was this guy who walked up to us and he said, are you in the NICU? We had like maybe just an exhausted look about us, and he could tell.
Just written all over you.
Yeah. But he walks up to us and he says, look, my wife and I just paid for a week of parking, but they're sending us home. So we want to give you this so you can have like the next 6 days of parking for free. And it's just this tiny, silly little thing that made such a difference, right? So these little gestures that you never realize what is going on in someone's life. You don't understand the gravity, whether it is like a super traumatic situation like what we were going through, or someone just had a really awful day. Being kind and doing like little gestures can make all the difference. I really think it can. So that honestly is how I try to approach most situations. Even if it's like I have a bad experience at a business or something, what is the point of going on social media and ripping them? nothing. There's nothing positive that will come from that.
Actually takes a lot of effort.
Yeah. Right. So if you can make the choice to instead just be kind, let it go, I think that returns to you in spades. So be kind.
I love that. Can you tell our community where they can find you, how they can connect with you and follow along with you?
Yeah, so the best place is on Instagram. It's at Brittany Caffet. Weird last name, Caffet. Everyone thinks it's Caffet.
Brittany, I said it wrong in the intro, even though you spelled it. I'm hearing you say it now. I know, but the way she said it is still different.
Cafe. Yeah.
Cafe, like you're going to a cafe, but cafe.
Yeah.
All right.
Cafe.
All right.
Amazing.
I was like, Caffet? And she's like, it's not Caffet. And I'm like,
I thought it
feel like I was
for
like,
years
cafe.
in my head. It wasn't until I heard somebody say your name at Evoke and I was like, I'm doing it wrong this whole time.
Yeah, so many people do. You're not alone.
Oh, no, amazing. Okay, everybody go follow along with Brittany and connect with her. Thank you so much for being here and sharing with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Yay!
Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this episode of the Her Podcast. If you want to follow along with us, you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at its.her.podcast. We can't wait to see you there.
Bye.
Adios.